I think the reason Notre Dame didn't really have, I mean, they had success in LA. They won that football game. But anytime Notre Dame goes out to USC at the end of the year, they, no matter the level of USC team, like they pretty much always play Notre Dame tough. So it kind of felt like going out there that they were going to play them tough, regardless of whatever USC team was going to show up on the field Saturday. And that's kind of how that game went. Um, I think another part of why Notre Dame did have some trouble against USC, at least initially through those first three quarters, is because the week before they were preparing for Army and in an Army offense that's completely different to the type of offense that Lincoln Riley runs on USC. So
Yeah.
some defensive coordinator Al Golden has talked about kind of taking ownership that maybe those guys weren't as prepared as what they should have been uh, for the Trojans because of the differences in offenses. So I think that that's partly the reason why. But as I kind of begun my thought here, I think that the way that game kind of shook out for Notre Dame kind of lays a blueprint for how other teams might try to attack a Notre Dame defense that's pretty widely regarded as one of the better units in the entire country.
Okay, and I guess that goes into our matchup. And so Curtis Rourke, and on the Arled's channel, you'll see our top scout Dave Syvertson has already put together a playoff preview of the top prospects to find out in this bowl game. So obviously Rourke is one of them, and Watts and others for Notre Dame. But with Rourke, one of the things I noticed when you do the research is he's had two bad games this year, or two average or below average games. And they happen to be the two toughest teams Indiana played. And that was Ohio State and Michigan. Those were in back-to-back games in November when his quarterback rating was now his average is 181. So his quarterback rating for the Michigan game was 138, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. And his average for Ohio State was 76. He was 8 of 18 for 68 yards. And that was bad. So now he's got to go to Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's defense is up there, obviously, with Ohio State, maybe even better than Ohio State. We don't know, but we'll find out. Like you said, competition's better and all that kind of stuff. But that's that's the thing to keep an eye on. Or that to me is not just some glaring or some normal stat. That to me is important, and I think that if Rourke struggles in this game, that was a sign right there.
The matchup between Curtis Rourke and the Notre Dame defense, specifically the pass defense, is going to be pretty fascinating because Indiana has the number one team passing efficiency in all of college football, and Notre Dame has the number one pass defense and team passing defensive efficiency in all college football. So it's really going to be a battle between two of the very best in the entire country. And I think I give Notre Dame the edge. And even though that, I said that I'm just slightly worrisome about how that Notre Dame secondary can hold up against some of the, better athletes that they see, first, you don't want to look too far ahead. I mean, we can because we're in the media. It doesn't matter to us. We're not paid to win the games. But,
Yeah.
As I've looked at the bracket, when Notre Dame has to play a Georgia or a Texas, I'm not as worried about Penn State. I don't know much about SMU, but those type of teams, when you have those types of athletes playing against you, I think that's when the potential flaws of this, the minimal flaws, but those types of flaws begin to become exposed in the Notre Dame secondary. I'm not as worried about it with Indiana. I know they have a pretty talented pass catcher on the outside who was a transfer from James Madison, just like all those, like pretty much the majority of the roster. Elijah Surratt, he's one of the top wide receivers in the Big Ten. I think he might give Notre Dame some trouble. But I know you kind of mentioned, started this conversation about Curtis Rourke. And I think that's been the whole theme of Indiana's season is like they've pretty much beat the heck out of, all most of the, lower end Big Ten teams and some of the non-conference opponents they've had to play. But when the upper echelon teams like Ohio State or Michigan, I mean, you can say what you want about Michigan this year. They won a national championship this year. Obviously a much different team, but they went into Ohio Stadium, unlike Indiana, and laid a pretty good licking on the Buckeyes in the
That's
final
right.
week of the season. So, Indiana is capable of matching up against top competition, but that's going to be, I mean, that's a big storyline going into this game is how is Indiana going to fare against another premier opponent, because the last time they played in the Horseshoe down in Columbus did not go to plan. And if they want to have success against Notre Dame, much of it is going to be on the shoulders of Curtis Rourke.
Yeah, and remember they got up to such a great start, and it turns out that their first 6 opponents are not going to bowls. And then they finally played the game that they stepped up Nebraska, and then they showed everybody we can play bowl teams, we can play average teams well, and they blew them out. It was kind of shocking. And then he went on like a nice little run even after that. But it's been those 2 games really, the Michigan Ohio State game where they finally stepped up in competition, way up, and that does include Michigan. And they did not pass those tests really, because even though they beat Michigan, Michigan is just not Notre Dame, and they're not even Ohio State. Even though they beat them talent wise, and we know that. I know that. I'm a Michigan fan. All right, so let's talk about the fact that Indiana has the number 1 ranked rushing defense, and Notre Dame needs to run the football. And matter of fact, we have a very hot short video here on the channel when we talked last about Love, Jeremiah Love, and that's been getting a lot of views because and it should, because this is a kid that could very well end up as a top Heisman guy for 2025. And not a lot of people have really watched Notre Dame football this year. And there are a lot of people that don't really know how good this kid is. So this is going to be a really nice opportunity for Love and Notre Dame going up against the top-ranked rushing defense in college football. Again, even though Indiana did not play the toughest teams in college football, it's still something to be number 1 in rush defense.
I've hit on a couple of the key storylines in this game. There's the battle between the 2 in-state schools. That's a big one. The Indiana number 1 passing efficiency on offense, and then Notre Dame's number 1 passing efficiency on defense. That's a storyline. And this is the other one that I'm really keying in on and doing some reporting on Blue and Gold, about Indiana's run defense and some of the challenges that they present against a Notre Dame offense that has pretty much relied on the run all season. Riley Leonard has grown as a passer, but I don't think Notre Dame has really had to rely on him to throw the football to win games. Like, there's been some instances where, they've gotten in a groove in the passing game, and they got guys like Bo Collins dropping the football, and they've had struggles from that aspect. They really haven't had a lot of consistency at the wide receiver position this season. And I mean, they've relied on the run game because it's been so successful. Jeremiah Love has truly got that type of capability to be a 2025 Heisman finalist. Jeremiah Love and Riley Leonard were doing a media hit last week, and they were kind of joking with each other that if Riley Leonard hadn't scored his dozen touchdowns or whatever it's been this season, and those scores have gone to Jeremiah Love, that Jeremiah Love very well could be, in the top 10 in Heisman voting and making his case to be in New York last Saturday for that trophy ceremony. That's how good he's been. And behind Jeremiah Love is also a running back that is, would be a running back 1 on a lot of Power 5, Power 4 teams across the country, and that's Jadarian Price.
Yep.
Price is one of those guys that he is a long touchdown run waiting to happen. He can bounce it outside in an instant, and next thing you know is he's in the end zone. And between those two guys, they've been very successful for Notre Dame and really allowing this offense to perform at such a high clip. And then you factor in Riley Leonard's ability as a runner. He has a nickname. He goes by Vanilla Vic, and it's because he's so elusive and so successful as a runner. I mean, when you look across all of college football, I don't know if you're going to find a quarterback that's as outstanding on the ground as Riley Leonard. And just between those three guys, I mean, they've really been able to carry the offense. And, Notre Dame's been able to get out to a lead in so many of these games that they are running the football a lot of the times because they're not really having to pass to catch up because they're playing from behind.
Good
So
point.
I know Indiana's run defense is going to pose some challenges. Some of what Marcus Freeman and some of the players that I've talked to in our media availability have said is, they're very active on the defensive front. There's a lot of different stunts, a lot of different things they use to challenge defenses, and I think it's going to be a big challenge for Notre Dame offensive line coach Joe Rudolph, offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock to combat what they're throwing at them. But Notre Dame's offensive line is, even though they started the year as a pretty young unit, I would say they're pretty experienced now. They have a lot of games under their belt. They've seen a really tough Texas A&M defensive line in College Station on the road. So Notre Dame's shown they can handle it. So, that's, like I mentioned, a big-time storyline that's going to be really exciting to watch and I think could really determine the outcome of the game.
A player that you also talked about before the USC game and said, because I asked about, does Notre Dame have enough weapons in the passing game? And one of the guys that you kind of reminded us about was their tight end, Mitchell Evans, and that he started to kind of get back into the flow, or at least you felt that way. And sure enough, he went out and probably had one of his best games statistically against USC. So that's something that we can't forget, because you might just look at his stats and go, well, that's just fly by his name, maybe even. But this is a kid that started the season and even last season as one of the top tight end prospects in the country.
Yeah, if you look at his game log, it's not too attractive this year. I
No.
mean, you're seeing games where he has catches of 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 4, 2. Then he emerges against USC and has 5 catches for 59 yards. I mean, that's not – who's the tight end at Bowling Green? Is it Harold Fannin?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
He's
he's
really
not
good. Yeah.
he's not a Harold Fannin,
No.
where Fannin's going to graduate as one of the top tight ends in college football history. He hasn't had that type of impact for Notre Dame, and he really hasn't had to. But the thing that you also look at when you see Mitchell Evans' game log, all 3 of his touchdowns have come in the last 4 games. So
Yep.
that's a big deal for Notre Dame, because that part of the offense was kind of missing towards at the beginning of the season. That Mitchell Evans was, like, at Texas A&M, for example, he was only playing on 3rd downs, I think, for the most part. And then the next week against NIU, he was a little bit more available. And then as the weeks went on, his workload increased. But now I think he's pretty much back to full strength. And that's a dimension of the Notre Dame offense that they can really rely on compared to a way they weren't really able to at the start of the year. So I think I'm still waiting on the true Mitchell Evans, like, breakout game this season. I mean, when you look back at last year, Mitchell Evans pretty much single-handedly won Notre Dame its game against Duke for his performance. I mean, he was pretty much Sam Hartman's only pass catcher, and he kept Notre Dame alive in that game. I mean, Mitchell Evans hasn't had to do that yet for Notre Dame, but he's fully capable.
And what was the reason he got off to such a slow start?
So against Pittsburgh last year on October 28th, I think week 9 or 10, he tore his ACL. So he was working his way back, was available during training camp. But sorry, my dog is behind me making some commotion. But
I know the
Mitchell
feeling.
Evans, yeah, so he was kind of on, like a workload management type of regimen where, they were being very cautious with him at the start of the season. I think Notre Dame was looking at the big picture with him.
One of the things, before I let you go, one of the things, and I'm going to of course, get a prediction from you. One of the things that I do believe that is going to come into play here is you mentioned all those James Madison players, and James Madison is a nice school, no question. I mean, we see what Kurt's done both there and in Indiana, but we also have to keep in mind that these players were playing at James Madison last year, and this is Notre Dame. I mean, this is the Holy Cathedral. This is Friday night. The entire country is watching. And can these kids, can they handle that? And we're going to find out, that's for sure. Can they handle it? Can all of them handle it? Even Rourke. I mean, this is something Notre Dame is used to be on national TV every single week. This is normal to them. Sure, they're going to be excited. They understand more people are going to be watching this game than any of the other games they've watched this year. I get that. They're also going to be nervous. But that's the one thing I also think is going to be an important side note of the reason why I like Notre Dame in this matchup is another reason, and that's it. I just think it's asking so much for these kids because they failed a test against Ohio State, completely failed, when they knew that was the biggest game that they played that year, and they knew everybody was watching, and that wasn't even what was going to happen on Friday night. Now, maybe they've learned. The first big one was Michigan. It was a night game, then the Ohio State game, and it kind of failed both tests. So have they learned? We'll find out. But because they haven't passed that test yet, I can't back a team that has failed in both of their tests. Maybe they'll pass it Friday night. I'll bet that they won't. Kyle?
Yeah, sorry. You cut out. I wasn't sure if all the power breakers went out in your studio. Yeah, so I know we've talked about on the show before, I primarily cover recruiting, high school football recruiting for Blue and Gold. So, of course, I'm very fascinated by, the players' paths to where, they end up. And with Indiana's case, it's obviously pretty unique because they have a first-year head coach, Kurt Signetti, and I think on between offense and defense, right around 6 or 7 starters from James Madison between both sides of the ball. But also, they're starting quarterbacks from the MAC, Curtis Rourke. Obviously, he's been one of the best statistical passers this year. Has had trouble, as you mentioned earlier, against some of the tougher opponents. But, one of their starting wide receivers, he's from the MAC. Excuse me. Defensive lineman, is pretty much all made up from the transfer portal. Like, their entire team has been pieced together by the transfer portal. And I think this team has really overachieved. They're extremely well coached. But as the recruiting guy in me, that's when I start to wonder when that talent discrepancy starts to become more apparent. Because I did a recruiting comparison to how Indiana's guys, kind of fared as or were rated as recruits compared to Notre Dame's, and they're they're not comparable at all.
Sure.
A lot of these guys when they played for James Madison, they were FCS recruits. So they didn't really have a lot of interest from FBS schools. So this team is full overachievers. I mean, they were all conference at James Madison. A lot of them's become all conference with Indiana. But that's where, if I'm an Indiana fan, that's where I start to become worried because they've shown that they weren't prepared and couldn't live up to the test. And in Columbus, will they be able to do it in South Bend? You listen to a lot of the national media narrative and everything like that, and a lot of the talk now has been that I think Indiana, that everyone's talking about how Indiana is going to give Notre Dame a much tougher game than they expect. I'm starting to wonder if Notre Dame is going to give Indiana a little bit too much more than they can handle.
Yeah, I always as a handicapper myself, not a professional one, but I've been handicapping games for a long time, and that is something that I always would worry about if I'm backing an underdog, and a lot of people in the national media seem to be jumping on that underdog. Upsets usually happen when you don't expect it. Not when people are saying, well, they're going to give him first of all, it's a 7-point spread also. Let's not turn this out to be some 14, 15-point spread. It's people talking like Indiana's going to give him a good, well, they should give him a good game. I mean, there's 7 points dog. I mean, we're not talking like the Michigan-Ohio State line. So, but yeah, I guess we're going to find out in a few days. And if Indiana can win the game, it'll be a huge story, no doubt about it. And I'm sure this is what the part of the college football playoff that I do love. I kind of wish I was siding with the dog here because I like the dogs, but I'm not. I firmly believe in everything that's going on with this Notre Dame team this year. And we just went over all the reasons why I think they're going to win the game and cover. What about you? What do you think? Do you have you put together a score yet?
I have, but I am going to alter it. And I'm going to go with Notre Dame 24, Indiana 16. So that's still going to have Notre Dame covering the spread. And from a betting aspect, Greg, you might know these numbers, but Notre Dame's among the best in college football in covering the spread this season. They've
Yeah.
done it, I think, 9 out of the 12 times. And they're 9-2-1 against the spread. They had a push early on. But also, Indiana has been similarly successful covering the spread 75% of the time.
Yes.
So, I think sports bettors are going to have a pretty challenging time trying to find out where to put their wages on this game. But when it comes right down to it, I give Notre Dame the edge. I know I ended my last soundbite by saying I'm starting to think that Notre Dame could possibly give Indiana too much they can handle. But I still want to err on the side that this is going to be a pretty, competitive game for the most part. I think Notre Dame's defense is going to cause Indiana a lot of trouble. One thing we didn't really talk about is, Notre Dame's kicking situation has been not great. It's been very inconsistent. Their starting kicker's been hurt. He's been trying to work his way back. He has not made a field goal, even though he's played in the last month. He hasn't made a field goal since the Florida State game on November 9th. He's like 1 of 5 since then. And Notre Dame hasn't needed field goals to win games this year, but when you get into the college football playoff, that's where those field goals matter. So I'm just kind of looking at little things like that where I think it can make this game a little bit closer than what, some pretty optimistic Notre Dame fans might think. So I'm going 24-16 for now. I think you have to factor in the weather. It's going to be cold. It's going to be windy. I'm sure we're going to get some snow. I mean, when you look at these Notre Dame, Indiana type teams and some of the teams in the traditional Big Ten, they're made for this type of weather and for low scoring defensive football games that are won in the trenches. So that's how I expect this one to play out on Friday.
Oh, if we can get snow, Notre Dame in a playoff game, come on. I mean, the gods will definitely be smiling on us on Friday night. I do see the weather forecast here. It does say AM snow. So hopefully the weather will push it more into the evening. That's what we'd like to see. But yeah, they do see a little bit of snow potential showers in the evening. It is going to be cold. Like you said, could be as cold as 20 degrees, which once again favors the running game. You don't want to be throwing the football all over the field when the temperature is about 25 degrees.